Welcome to this series of interviews with remaining Chisenhale Studio founding members. These interviews will form an audio archive illuminating Chisenhale Art Place's archive of photographs and is part of our commemoration of the 40-year anniversary of Chisenhale Art Place. In October 1980, a group of artists were granted guardianship of a derelict industrial building in Bow, East London, by the London Borough of Tower Hamlets. In return for use of the building and cheap rent, the artists were charged with the repair of the building in order to create affordable individual artist studios, a dance space, gallery, and an educational program for the local community. The image on screen depicts those very early days in 1980, shortly after work had begun. This interview is with painter and founding member Vincent Milne. The image on screen is titled Self-Portrait and was made between the year 2000 and 2001. Vincent is a founding member of Chisenhale Art Place. Born in Hackney in 1953, Vincent initially studied fine art at Goldsmiths College. He later gained a postgraduate certificate from the Royal Academy Schools. The image on screen is a drawing entitled Chestnut Tree in Greenwich Park and was made in the 1990s. Vincent has very kindly selected a series of images from the Chisenhale archive to discuss his memories of the early days of Chisenhale Art Place. The first of which depicts a younger Vincent in his newly built studio. Is that correct, Vincent?
It is. This is an image of me standing in a partially built studio, and as you can see, there are some collages on the walls, and there's a painting facing the wall, so we see the back of the painting. And the plasterboard is by no means complete. You can see the breeze blocks with the fresh cement still on the surface before being plasterboarded over and secured. I just remember having to use the Hilti drill and breaking the drill bits, trying to get into the ceiling. The concrete stanchions were so solid to put a beam to secure a very long breeze block wall, which is dividing my space from Ingrid Kermer's space. And a lot of the artists who had been initially involved from scratch were trying to make their work at the same time as they were building their walls and doing everything they needed to do. And this photo is probably before any electricity was put in. The collages that I was doing at the time were heavily influenced by Harry Thubron, who had been teaching at Goldsmiths, and I subsequently wrote a thesis about his work and the influence he had on art education in the 50s and 60s. And I just loved what he did and still do. I was influenced very strongly. Shortly after completing the building work, my work changed. I became more figurative, and I was painting landscapes on the roof of the studios, which is an extraordinary thing to do, really. But I think you can see that myself, as many of the other people in the same position, just couldn't wait to get going, and were working in a slightly shambolic state of affairs.
So you were still actually finishing off the studios themselves, while at the same time actually attempting to use the studio as a functional artist studio and make work in.
Yeah, we were like greyhounds out of the trap. We just couldn't wait any longer. It was a long building program, and most of us were trying to earn a living, mainly from perhaps part-time teaching and trying to have a life as well. But it was a big slog, and I think everybody was incredibly committed to doing this, because if there hadn't been, we would never have got it off the ground. And there were some key players that were really important for giving us the focus, the technology, gathering in all the materials, getting as much donated as we could deal with. I don't know if we had enough money to pay for anything. I think a lot of the wood we used was recycled wood, And as I say, I think the plasterboard at one point was donated to us, and so it was used plasterboard, which we needed. It was later, perhaps we started buying new plasterboard. Some studios were immaculately constructed. Mine was never immaculately constructed, and I can still see elements in this photograph that I think are still there.
And are you currently occupying the same studio?
I am.
Well, so you've been in that studio for 40 years?
Yes. And it seems like an hour.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what's happened to the time. The sun hasn't changed any. It keeps coming in at the same time every day for 40 years. But I've changed.
What I love about this image is the fact that the breeze blocks, well, first of all, that the partition wall or the plasterboard, it doesn't actually reach the ceiling.
No.
The second thing I like about it is the fact that you can actually still see the wet mortar in the bricks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think anchorites were walled in, weren't they? There is an element of the anchorite in all of this, where the last breeze block went in. Yeah. Concrete floors, really cold, still really cold on the feet. So I think there's a dreadful discarded circular carpet on the floor there. I know that my shoes were concreted in onto my feet. I couldn't actually bend those shoes. They were so full of concrete because I was just too lazy to wipe off the wet concrete over the months that they just became solid concrete. There's a photograph of Albert Irvin's shoes, which are, evoke the act of painting, just covered in paint. I'm afraid mine are just covered in concrete.
The second image that Vincent has very kindly selected depicts two artists on what I believe is the roof of Chisenhale Art Place, passing breeze blocks between each other. Do you know who these two individuals are, Vincent?
Yes, one is definitely Richard Wilson. The other figure could be Candy Kemp, or it could be Fran Cottel. I'm not sure, but it's certainly Richard. And you can see that he is dragging the breeze blocks off of a platform, which was mounted on a kind of fireman's ladder. They're actually standing inside the walls of what is above the dance floor. So this is a dance floor roof. And they would then have access to the studios and the stairwell of the dance floor adjoining the studios. From on the far left, you can see what is actually the handrail of a staircase and the double doors that would lead us into the studios. And this was obviously a case of these breeze blocks are destined for the dance space, so that they wouldn't have to be walked through the 3,000 square feet of floor space that the studios had. So you can see behind the tiled walls of the top floor studios, this kind of cantilevered roof, which has consistently been a problem for leaks and various other things. But you've got the same tower block behind as it stands now. But that dance floor roof was often like a swimming pool, and the most amazing reflections. It was often inches or more deep in water. But this kind of work that we were doing then was full on. It was backbreaking work. People like Richard and Ron Hazelden and various others had worked out the best way of getting the heavy stuff into the building. And this was quite an amazing thing to have this ladder structure that had a platform. We'd put the breeze blocks from the lorry straight onto the platform and be zoomed up to the floor above, which was 2 or 3 floors, then put into the interior of the studios, or in this case I think the dance space. Ron Hazelden had his studio in the dance space at this particular time. which is why I think these breeze blocks are ending up in the dance space.
So the third image that you've selected, Vincent, is of the same event, it appears to me, and it seems to be Richard Wilson leaning over the edge of the building from the roof and taking individual blocks from this device you mentioned that was used to ferry the blocks up Chisenhale Road up until the roof of the dance space.
Yes, I think you can see here that Richard is doing this fairly back-breaking thing. I mean, just as well we were young, it's really easy to put your back out, twisting round with a breeze block on in your arms. Some people were trying to be just move things on a bit by dragging more than one breeze block, but I don't think anybody could do that with the breeze block suspended on the platform over the street. It was really quite dangerous. If anything had fallen, that would have been the end of something below. You can see the school on the right, and of course this is the school before all the additions. One of the nice things about having the school there is that the red brick would reflect this incredibly beautiful warm light into the studios at sunset. You can see that Richard is standing on the wet dance floor space, and this is related to the previous image. And I think these breeze blocks will end up inside the studios and possibly inside the dance space. So this relates to the two previous images, because you can see Chris Maynard, who was a founder member, and this view hasn't altered a lot, but you can see him sitting on the brickwork stairs that lead onto the dance floor roof from the studios. The dance studios and the artist studios were linked by a staircase that was not blocked off. Richard was bringing the breeze blocks in through these doors into the artist studios, and then possibly they were being taken down a floor into the dance space, which is behind Chris here. And one of the reason why I've chosen this photo is very shortly after we'd established ourselves there and we were all busy working on our own work, this view became a really important view for me, and I did many paintings from the floor above the studio floor, which is directly above Chris's head. There was a kind of an escape hatch. It was like being in a submarine, and you'd kind of pop out onto the roof and you'd be sort of surrounded by sky and amazing 360-degree views of London, Victoria Park. This view has St Paul's on the right of the tower block behind, which subsequently is obscured by the building of Broadgate. And this was the early 80s, and we all came to Chisenhale because of our difficulties with Butler's Wharf. Everybody knows those stories. I was part of a partnership, married to somebody who was Lynette Lombard, who was in C5, which was the freezer department of Butler's Wharf. It was a horrible concrete block. When the fire occurred and we were all removed, she moved into D block, and I think a lot of the original members who came from W block were already in W block, and W block was next to what is now the Design Museum. Chris, I don't know where he came from. I don't know if he was a St Martin's student, but there were different groups of artists who came from either St Martin's, Reading, Hornsey. In my case, it was because, and Goldsmiths, it was because of we were at least three Goldsmith students ex-Goldsmith students that had joined this other group of people. There were other people at Butler's Wharf. Obviously, people like Derek Jarman were doing their own thing, and there were quite a few independent artists. There was David Fairbairn, who went to Australia eventually. There was Neil Bally. My partner at the time, Lynette Lombard, was with Di Livy, John Fuller, David Fairbairn, and Neil Bally in D Block, which is this incredible wooden interior of probably the oldest part of Butler's Wharf, which was made out of ship's timbers, and you felt like you were in the galley of a warship. from Henry VIII's time. But this view is extraordinary because it's still there. The dance floor roof still collects water, and it reflects like a mirror, but nobody's looking at it because apart from the person in the studio now, because you can't go onto the rooftop any longer. I do remember working on the rooftop at night during an eclipse, and Goldsmith's MA students were having an exhibition in the gallery space. They didn't see that I was working on the rooftop, so they saw that the door was open. They came up, and a couple of them fell over. They tripped up and went flat on their faces. It was such a dark space up there. It was quite extraordinary on a night where you could just see the stars, and they'd all gone up there to see this eclipse.
Well, it was that dark. Wow.
It was that dark. I mean, it was Catherine Yass's year. They'd all gone onto the roof because this eclipse, which was the most extraordinary eclipse, and I'd attempted to draw and paint it, but it was that dark that they fell over me. I felt such an idiot.
There's another image in the archive actually that I took quite a fancy to when I was going through the images, and it's of that roof, and it's an image taken on the roof looking towards the flats, except the entire roof is covered in freshly fallen snow.
Yeah. I mean, at one point, this dance floor roof had a single wire structure. It was a chair which had its seat removed, and it reflected perfectly. So it was like its doppelganger reflected in this, and it looked as though it was suspended in the sky, because the roof surface was just reflecting all the clouds in the sky, and suddenly there was this chair just suspended in the sky, but it was just a reflection. It's just one of those images that just I took a photograph of it, and it's a fantastic image, but fairly meaningless unless you were there. I don't know what's happened to Chris Maynard. I wonder what he's done, or whether he's still alive.
How long was he in the studios for? Do you know?
He was there for a few years. I mean, he was a very likeable man. I don't know if he was an architect, or that's where I wasn't very good at taking in things at that time. That there were so many people with different backgrounds. Possibly they changed during their time at Chisenhale and had ambitions to do other things. I think Chris was Canadian, and he may well have gone back to Canada.
So the next image that you've selected, Vincent, is of one of the original founding members, I'm assuming in the studios, creating a piece of surrealist art, or I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, I mean, this is very typically in Chapman, I think. He's got a tremendous sense of humour. He and Maggie, his wife, were very important in helping set up and administer the studios. Ian was part of a group of ex-Hornsey students, Richard Burson being one of them. Jonathan Page was another. Their year was, the three of them, and there might have been more people from Hornsey at the time. But you can see he's nailing a baguette, which is a really useful thing to have at the end of a broomstick for whatever work you're going to pursue. But I think he's in the room that Maggie occupied, which was the office. That office was like a dungeon, and it was in the basement of the building, and you would access it when you came in the double doors, the front doors of the studio. You would then descend into Maggie's office, get the rota for the day, be told what to do, quite rightly, because you had to do certain things. You had to kind of almost clock in. You had to do the hours that were specified. There were jobs that needed to be done within specific times. I mean, things like putting glass in the windows. I mean, just to secure the building was the major problem. Maybe that's what the baguette's for. Maybe it's to clean the windows. But Ian was in the building for a number of years, and like many of the founder members, he went on to other things. And so, although I haven't been in contact with him, I mean, the odd thing, the art world is so small that because I grew up in a place not far from Hornsey Art School, Ian and I met when I was 17, just out of school. I was doing a summer job working on the parks, and so was Ian. And we used to play football in the park at lunchtimes when we weren't doing odd gardening jobs for the council. So I haven't seen him in probably 30 years, but Malcolm Jones saw Ian quite recently, because as you get older, quite recent can mean 10 years ago. But I think Malcolm Jones saw Ian about 3 or 4 years ago at an education meeting in Westminster. And I think Ian's been involved with education ever since he left the studios.
And I mean, you met him when you were 17, so I mean,
yeah.
Am I right in thinking that you remained close for the kind of?
No, I don't think he had much regard for me. Quite rightly, just saw me as a young whippersnapper. I mean, Ian's very self-possessed and he knows what he wants.
Fair enough. I'm glad you picked that image because it's one of the ones that, yeah.
I think it is very typically. I mean, at one point, Ian did stand up. But this is something which is visual, and I think it just makes me laugh.
I'm trying to work out the where the office would have been if you walk in the double doors. Are you headed towards the education room, or?
Yeah, no. Before you've even entered the building, you go in through the double doors. Immediately to your right is a staircase descending.
There's a door there now.
There's a door there now, but underneath there is a hidden world. It's like Churchill's war rooms. It really was. It was quite extraordinary. And it's still there, I'm sure.
I think it's used for storage. You can rent space there.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. The other room that this could be is next to the toilets on the first floor, which is a peculiar setup. So it's the studio below Kevin Harrison's on the floor above. It's the studio which is composed of what appears to be the remnants of a boardroom, and there's another little bit. And between the boardroom and this room is the lift shaft, and it'd be absolutely amazing to get a lift going there. But it was decided fairly early on that lift could never be operated on the budget that we had. So there's a lift there.
There's actually another image in the archive which doesn't date from 1980, but does date from some kind of later building works that took place where they actually uncovered the old entrance to the lift.
Yeah, I think that there's a photograph of double doors, which I thought might have been the doors that lead out onto the dance space floor, but they could actually be the double doors that lead into the lift. It was such a dangerous, it was like a horror film, and there is a well-known image from a horror film where somebody draws a light into a lift shaft, and this guy, poor guy, well, actually, he deserved it. He was the baddie. He kind of reaches for the light, thinking it's the button to pull the lift, and he just falls into this empty lift shaft. And it was like that. It had this feeling of like horror. And on the roof, in some of the photographs, there's a I don't know if you're going to show that one, of Di Livy building or renovating one of the rooftop buildings. There is a big lift shaft building on the roof, adjacent to the building that Di Livy is working on. Yeah, so this is a folly. I can't remember what this building was. It may have had an oil tank in it. And I do remember that, yes, I think it did have an oil tank in it. I could be completely wrong, of course. But I think that oil had leaked onto the roof, and it's corrosive. I think it melted the roof tarmac also. Anyway, I'm going off at a tangent here. I think at one point the plan was to remove that building because it was possibly a danger. And then we found out we weren't allowed to move it. So I think it's being rebuilt here by Di Livy, and I think that's Christine, who was an early member. And Di Livy, I think that's what they're doing. I think they're rebuilding or cleaning up the brickwork. And so there is a building on the rooftop which is perfectly serviceable. It's got a roof on it. It could become something in the future. And you can see that the school is behind. It's only when you're on the roof that you realise just how tall these Victorian schools are. And there is a playground on the rooftop. When I used to paint on this rooftop, the children and I used to wave at each other. I don't think they're allowed to go on the rooftop anymore. But I do remember that when we were first there, this rooftop playground of the school opposite was serviceable.
From my experience, they tend to use the playground on the ground floor, but I have noticed that the playground on the upper floor, and they do use it. I guess there must be fundraising events or barbecues and stuff like that for the summer.
Sure.
And also, I have heard kind of a few different stories about this building on the roof. I've often heard it being described as housing a massive water tank.
It's a water tank, right? Okay.
And also that there was another story about an oil tank or oil drums that were out down.
I do remember the oil leaking, and that was it was kind of corrosive, and I think it was possibly causing a leak in the roof by corroding the covering of the roof.
But there was also a story of an oil drum on the ground floor on Canal Side that had been damaged or opened by somebody or by a vandal, and it had actually leaked into the canal.
I'm sure. I mean, one of the things that possibly, if ever the building is developed in an alternative way, there are windows in the gallery which have been covered up, very large windows, and I think possibly a doorway. But the windows give you access to the light of the canal and all the reflections. And we covered them up when the gallery was created. And you kind of forget, if I'm on the south side of the building, I often forget that there is a canal the other side.
I'm going to move on to the cricket match pictures. I wasn't sure if there was the one of the artists you wanted to talk about, or whether it was the one
of the artists. Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, we can name the people all but two. From left to right, it's Emma Gunningham. I'm not sure if that was our architect with the beard and the crossed arms, and he looks as though he's got control of the ball, although it's a cricket match. We've got Fergus Early from Dance Space with the flat cap. Next to him is John Fuller, I believe. In front of John Fuller is Richard Wilson. I'm standing behind Richard Wilson with the cricket bat. Standing next to me is Peter Webster. In front of Peter Webster is John George. Then there is another chap who I recognise, but I can't remember his name. Next to him is Richard Swift. In front of Richard Swift is Tricia Austin. And then there is another recognisable character I can't remember. And this was a really delightful occasion. And we all ended up in the pub, I think, after. I'm not sure if we played the cricket game in order to get into the pub, but it's the usual thing. And I think we might even have had cucumber sandwiches. I think we had a tea as well. And I remember it was very nice to kind of socialise in a different way with the members of the artist group and the dance space. And at one point, I think, for quite a long period, there was a lot of sharing of facilities, for example. Before they built their sprung floor and things like that, we were pretty much on the same level. It was just harsh concrete floors. I think this would have been perhaps within 2 or 3 years of us being there, maybe even earlier. But there was such a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm for what we were doing. And it's quite amazing that the way everybody from completely different backgrounds, different art colleges, or just different experiences had come together to make this thing happen.
And would this cricket match have taken place after the building work had been completed, or would stuff?
No, I don't think the building work has been completed, has it? 40 years on. No, I think it we must have been fairly confident that we could even take the time. I mean, it was quite a desperate race to get things done. We had 5 years rent-free, and then we knew we would all start having to pay. For dance space, they had to make their space not a commercial, viable enterprise, but something that could be used in a really professional way and at the same time have a community base. And I think we also wanted to feel that we could establish ourselves in the studio and then start providing community-based education, set up the gallery. And the gallery obviously was run by the artist, which, it was too much to take on for. It always meant that somebody was doing far more work than somebody else. And I think those people know who they were. It certainly wasn't me. I always tried to keep out of it. People like Pete Webster went on to teach. I used to teach with Pete at Middlesex Poly. Ingrid Kermer was teaching at Middlesex Poly, and she wanted to move on. So she said, would you take over from me? And I found myself teaching evening courses with Pete on the Middlesex Poly Foundation. But Pete had got a son and needed to move on, and he left the studios and went to work in Falmouth. I'm still in contact with Pete. Richard Swift went on to teach at Cambridge, art history. John Fuller's still in studios. Fergus Early, was instrumental in working at the dance space. Richard Wilson obviously has moved on, become quite world famous under him. John George, still in the studios. Tricia moved into education, I think working at probably various establishments, but I think Central St Martin's, and is an author. Emma was in the studios until quite recently and has moved away. But there are 3 people here, we don't know who they are. And I wonder what they went on to do.
My memory serves me correctly. I think Kate Hardy was able to identify everybody bar the gentleman with the flat cap.
Yeah, so that's Fergus. So that clears up that that one. He's the odd one out in a sense because he's a dancer. I wonder if he was playing for us. I'm not sure. I remember Maurice Aegis, of course, was an incredibly important figure in the studios, and his daughter became a well-known dancer, and she was in the other team. So the other photograph of the dance space, I think. I see now we've got Ron Hazelden standing there with a very strange hat on the far right side of the photograph. He's certainly not a dancer. He's one of the artists. We've got David Howlett, who was very helpful on the legal side, sort of third in on his knee, holding on to, I think, something there, a cricket bat or something. We have some characters that went on to become very well known in their field, and I can't remember his name. I'm going to call him Chris Jeck. Don't think that's his name. He's on his haunches there. He's on his knees. He is a musician. Worked very closely with quite a number of people in the dance world, and I think he's still operating as a musician. The other faces are very. I don't know if that's Kerry Trengove there, with his foot on the ball, and the chap next to him was one of the artists. Again, I don't know who he is. So sorry, this one isn't bringing any clarity.
Well, the way Kate spoke about this image was that the previous image was the artist team, and this was the dance team, except the dance team didn't have a full cohort of players.
No, I think David Howlett, who I think worked for this group of lawyers and solicitors, who gave us, I think, quite useful information. He would have been on the dance team, and I'm calling him Chris Jack. That's not his name. He was part of the dance group. Obviously, Ron was a member of our group, and I think the 2 figures that I might recognise as Kerry Trengove and another unnamed artist. They're obviously not part of the dance group. I'm assuming the rest are. But this isn't the full dance group. I think they must have run off to the pub as soon as they could get there, or they're having their cream tea, setting up the cream tea.
Excellent. Thanks, Vincent. I do have one last question for you, and that's I'm just curious to know what being involved, what having a studio in Chisenhale for the past 40 years has meant to you, but also what has been part of Chisenhale Art Place as a wider organisation meant to you over the past 40 years?
Well, it's been a kind of a place where I've been able to practice what I do completely in a state of freedom, from very little stress from outside. But although I'm fully aware for quite a lot of people, there's been a lot of hard work just to maintain our presence in the building, and the trustees and the Artists Advisory Committee have managed to keep us going. And Andrea has been a stalwart in trying to corral us into doing things over the years, from Maggie through Helen to Andrea. They might be the only people you would hear from if you're not in a daily contact with your fellow artists on your floor. And I suppose because so many of us have to earn a living, we're not often there as much as we could be. And plus illness and various other things stops you from doing really what you want to do. So the fact that I'm still there, I find it very surprising that I've been there for so long, because it doesn't feel like that. And every time I go there, I think about how I'm going to make the best painting I've ever made. And it's just odd to think that it started as just one great big space, and it's been divided into many individual worlds, and people have been able to concentrate on what they do without any interference from the outside world. Plus, we've often invited people in through open studios. That's always been an amazing thing to do. It can be annoying because you don't want to do it, but you have to do it, and it's always enjoyable. Plus, you have the education spaces in both the studios and the gallery, making that connection between the community and the artists. And so it's not an ivory tower. It never has been, although I say we're working without interference. We're very much aware of where we are in that building, and being in Tower Hamlets and the relation of Tower Hamlets to the rest of London, because most of the artists have often been involved in education. There's the sense that the studios are a place where you develop your ideas, which then go out into the world, either through teaching or through exhibiting. And obviously some of the more ambitious artists who have made their names either from working in the gallery, the studios, or from exhibiting in the galleries, some of them have become very well known. But for those of us that haven't, it's just been an amazing place to be. At times I've been in a state where I've been homeless. My studio's been a great anchor. I haven't been on the streets, I don't mean that, but quite a few artists, they run out of money and they can't afford to live anywhere. You sleep on somebody's sofa and you go into work and you think, life is fine till you get yourself back on your feet again. It's not been easy for a lot of the artists. I'm sure it still isn't. And the present position we're in, just got to be optimistic.
Thanks, Vincent.